Well, Paul Crane is joining us again. As you know, he's done his population atlas, which we've talked about from time to time on this programme. You're back again because I know Tynwald is going to be talking about population, all being well, on their sitting this month. You have been coming up with some stats which we're going to start showing in a second. And your concern has always been there, that things aren't quite what is being said. Is that am I on the right path here?
Not that I'm concerned that things aren't as being said, but here we are now. We've passed the halfway line between two censuses. The 2016 census was held around this time of year, and 3 years ago the report came out a year after that. We're only 2 years before the 2021 census. The 2016 census was a shock because the population had dropped by nearly 1,200 people. And the Isle of Man had a terrific outward net migration loss of younger adults and an ageing of the population and various other things that were happening that census showed. Here we are 3 years on, and we still have all of the vulnerabilities that we had at the time of that census. Indeed, they're getting stronger now. The ageing of the population is continuing. We're probably now the fourth oldest country in the world based on the percentage of the population over 65, and our births are down again. So all the issues are still there in front of us. So I've produced a blog on the website.
And we have these graphs to look at here, and we've got 5 of them. And first of all, then, the population based on GP registers. And we've had this dip, but we're on the way up, right?
That's right. These are government figures. I'm taking them from the Council of Ministers' quarterly economic reports, but in there they're not presented like this. They're presented as how the population compares with the same quarter a year before, and that's quite confusing. So I've asked for the data from Economic Affairs, and they provided this. So I've got the quarterly estimated population, and since 2011, March 2011, which was the previous census, we can see how the population declined to March 2016, which was the last census, and then the government's estimate is that the population has been gradually rising since then. We need to be a little bit cautious about it. It's based, as it says, on the GP registers, but the GP registers always show about 3,000 or 4,000 more people than the census shows. Okay, there's an adjustment then made to that to try and bring it into line. So in this period, what's been happening is that the number of people registered with a GP, 4.2% has taken off to peg what that relationship was in March 2016, and that continues as a 4.2% reduction from the number of people registered with a doctor. Where that's a little bit uncertain is that at the time of the 2011 census, the difference between the number of people registered with a GP and the census count was only 2.9%. So this is not a constant figure. So this is an estimate. We can't say this, we're certain this is what it is.
But we are going up if you believe this, right?
But we do appear to see population increase from, at the census, 8,314, through to a figure of 38,932. So there's 618 people more here at the end of December 2018. The halfway point between the two censuses would have been here, September 2018. So halfway between the last census and the next one, we've seen growth of 600 people. Now, we used to be growing at between 800 and 900 a year before 2011, so this is not restoring that sort of growth. It is growth, but we're only halfway back to where we were in 2011, so it's slow growth that's taking place.
Okay, let's move to our next figure here, the graph. This estimated population under 65 years old going down.
Exactly the same data source, and it's coming from the number of people registered with GPs, because in the GP registers, the quarterly feedback that they give to government gives the split in the population. How many of those people on the register were over 65, and then you can calculate under 65. So we have those figures. So this is taking this same data, and what it shows, we see this tremendous decline in the under 65s between the last two censuses, and down 3,000 odd, as you can see there. And since the last census, the figures have absolutely flatlined. Indeed, there are 117 fewer people under 65 now than there were at the time of the census. So halfway between the censuses, we've got no increase in the under 65s. Now that's a disappointment, if you like, that the population growth that's taking place is not in the under 65 population. That's actually declined a fraction.
So those new people that you saw, that first one, they're the older people coming in, are they?
Yes, the next slide will show us that. But just holding with this for now, there are a number of factors involved in this. One of the things going on here, we've got in this period, we've moved into, from about here, we've moved into fewer births than deaths. Okay, so that gap has been opening up over this 3-year period until here the gap is approaching 200, I think, between the two. So if this population under 65 stays level, you have to think about, well, how many are being born into that population and what's happening at the top end of that population. When you put in a ceiling of 65 years, we have more than 1,000 people in every age group, age 64, age 63, age 62, and so on. So as each year passes, more than 1,000 people cross the 65 threshold. So there's 1,000 go up and only 700 odd come in. And migration must be making up the difference for it to be level. Yeah. So there is net inward migration in this age group, but not large.
So to this slide then now, which is showing the estimated population age 65 and over, and that's going up, which is what you were alluding to there. Basically it had to, because that's where the population increases are coming from, which is not necessarily good news, right? Because they're not the economically active.
Well, that's the bit that's open to debate and incentives and challenges and so on. We've got a number of things happening here. If we go with the figures first of all, we can see that since the census there's been a continued growth, maybe not quite as steep, but a continued growth in the over 65 population. At this point here, we are now certainly in the top 6 countries in the world in terms of the percentage of our population aged over 65.
The top
Depending on the source, we're perhaps about 4th. Japan's way out in front. Germany, Finland, Italy, Portugal are in there sort of with us at over 21%. Of our population aged over 65. There's a UN term for that, hyper-aged population. So we're one of half a dozen countries that are hyper-aged currently. And so that's an interesting figure to start with. But in terms of, are these people moving into the Isle of Man? Well, they don't need to. We've got a lot of people in the 60s who each year cross the threshold. You know, there's 1,000 a year joining this group because of the shape of the Isle of Man's population structure. So large numbers of people, indeed some of the groups in the upper 50s have got maybe 1,400 people in the groups. You know, so we've got a very large bulge in our population in this older age group crossing over here. So this is set to rise here for a long time to come. The increase in numbers will happen as the 60s and 50s go over 65, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the percentage has to rise. That depends on what's happening elsewhere. You can be adding to the numbers here, but if large numbers were coming in younger age groups, the percentage wouldn't grow. Here, because we haven't got large numbers coming in the younger age groups, the growth in the number of people over 65 adds to the percentage over 65, so we can see that that's growing. Does it mean that they're not working? Well, no, we've been seeing in these 3 or 4 years, we've been seeing the retirement age for women gradually rising, going through. It's hit 65 now. I think it rises to 66 in 2020 for men and women. So more of the population are not getting their state pensions, at least, until they're older. And where there has been some increases since the census in the number of people employed, that is quite possibly women in 62, 63, 64 staying on in work because they haven't got a state pension coming.
This is fascinating stuff. We need to pause. We're going to take a part 2, so stay with us. There's more graphs to come.